Hello, listeners. Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network, and I want to take just a quick moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network designed specifically for all the education technology enthusiasts out there. The Higher Ed Geek podcast is a deep dive into the world of educational technology and its transformative impact on the student experience. Geek out each week with host Dustin Ramsdell. His conversations are a mix of engaging storytelling, expert analysis, and a genuine passion for all things higher ed and tech. Whether you're an educator or an administrator or just someone passionate about the intersection of technology and education, this podcast promises to deliver content that's both enlightening and entertaining. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or by searching The Higher Ed Geek wherever you get your podcasts.
Today, you get, those myriad of spam numbers constantly. And so if you don't have a number that you don't know, you don't pick it up. So it's becoming a little more increasingly difficult to do surveying by phone, regardless of people being home or not. I do think that might actually help a bit in terms of being able to reach people, at least on landlines, if they still have them, which also might be skewing polling results a little bit as well, because you are now getting people who have landlines. I have a landline. I only use it to find my cell phone when I can't find it. So
that's a great use for it, though.
Only thing I use it for is, okay, where's my phone? Can't find it. Let me call my number from my landline. I hear it buzzing somewhere. Great, it's in the house.
Welcome to the EduData Podcast, a podcast that serves as your weekly guide to the data driving higher education. We are your hosts. I'm Jamie Boggs.
And I'm Timothy Davis. Join us every Friday for weekly breakdowns of the most important data, trends, and topics in higher education.
The EduData Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below.
Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.
Hello and welcome to EduData, the podcast. I'm Jamie Boggs with Timothy Davis, and for the very first time, Timothy, we have a guest. Why don't you introduce him?
So excited that we have a guest today. It is our first guest on the podcast. Today we have Steven Fischer from EducationDynamics. Steven, tell us a little bit about your position there and what you do.
Sure. So I am the Senior Market Research Manager. And in that role, I work on all the primary and secondary market research we do internally and externally to help colleges be better informed about decisions they're making, be it to address student needs or programs they want to launch or a whole host of different areas.
We recently covered one of your reports, one of your primary research reports, is that correct? The online student survey, which came out earlier this year. I think it was January, February.
Yes.
We covered that around the same time. And we had some questions about the sample size and some of the research methodology. And we took some time in that episode to talk about research methodology. Y'all reached out and you were like, hey, let's chat about it. And so here we are. Let's talk about some research methodology.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys reaching out, and I'm looking forward to these today's conversation, but hopefully even more in the future. But if you could talk to us about the way that EducationDynamics goes about conducting your surveys. I know you work with some partners, but how do you guys approach your research?
Studies like online college students report or other market studies we do for our clients, we generally work with panel provider partners who we've worked with in the long-term, newer term. And what they do is they build out these national large-scale panels that have the ability, they ask them initial questions about who they are, get some demographics on them, and we say, this is what we need to them. Like, we're looking for a particular set of students in a particular region, be it a specific type of program, subject field, age, any of those types of things. They will provide us a sample. We write up the survey instrument. We certainly work with our partners, our clients, on the wording, what they need exactly in there. And we put them in the field. We survey online. We incentivize the participants and come back with full findings and able to come up with recommendations as well how to best service those students.
Right. So just to kind of recap that, and I think this is a really interesting part for folks that don't have a research background, that haven't kind of seen behind this curtain before. So you guys prepare the questions that you want to ask and the format, and that's kind of what you were talking about there with, like, you prepare the survey, right? Then you work with a partner to go out and actually find these survey respondents. You pay that partner, and you also pay the incentive that the partner gives out to survey respondents. They then complete the survey.
In that incentivization, we have different sort of ways to check on those type of things. So again, we require all the questions to be answered. If they don't answer the questions, they don't get their incentive, they can't move on in the survey. We also find other ways to sort of reduce bias as well in those, because there's always that. So we make sure that there are answers that are open-ended as a qualitative response. Most of our surveys are qualitative and quantitative. We use those qualitative responses to make sure that respondents are answering the questions fully, truthfully. If we get to an answer, there was one survey we did where somebody got in and the qualitative answers was using language from Alice in Wonderland as their responses. And I only
right. So they just like pasted it in.
I Googled what they were putting in there because I'm like, what is this? This looks like something. And obviously we got rid of that response. We told our partner that this person, A, will not be in our survey, and B, you should consider removing them. But we require one to answer every question and make sure they're answering in a robust and complete manner.
Right, and that's like a way that you sort of control for bias in the research process is, in some cases, right, some people are in a way self-selecting when they say, I want to be part of a survey. In other cases, they might say, like, I just want to do this survey so that I can get the incentive. But what you're saying is that you've got your questions, multiple choice, and then you have also some like short form written responses. And with those, you evaluate to say, like, is this person just like, clicking a random C, B, A, whatever for the survey response and getting through it quickly, and then just, making up whatever for the short answer. And so you can kind of control for bad survey responses.
And we have other ways to run that as well. I mean, firstly, we randomize the answer responses, so they actually have to read through them to answer. It's not like it's an alphabetical thing or, they're randomized a bit. The other thing we look at too is we generally know how long the survey will take because we take it ourselves to make sure there's, quality checks and whatnot, make sure that everything is running smoothly. And we know, let's say the survey will take 15 minutes to take. If someone finishes in 6 minutes, we know they're speeding through. Like it is, like I said, like clicking through. So we will remove those people as well as a way of quality control.
That sounds great, Steven. And I think the impetus of this conversation was a conversation that Timothy and I were having about sample size and sample representations. What's your approach to that? I know you guys have been doing a lot of these surveys for a long time. So at this point, you just continue to adjust and perfect. But starting back at the beginning, how do you decide about the size of the population? What margin for error are you considering with your confidence levels and looking at the accuracy of that data?
Sure. So firstly, in terms of ensuring we have the right sample, as I talked about our process earlier, in addition to the screening that we do on the partner side, we also have screening questions in our survey to really ensure that these are the right people coming in. When we have those lists from our clients that we work with, we will randomize those lists as well to make sure that we're not just going alphabetical or wherever they inquired or applied. I mean, we do like a reverse chronological a little bit to make sure that people are coming in at the newest first, but randomize those a bit. So when we send out those lists, we're not getting just straight who they put on the list first. And in terms of margins of errors and whatnot, we want to make sure we're as close to like industry standards as possible. For example, on your podcast last we heard about the online college students, you had some questions about the sample size there and how we got to that 3,000, ended up being 3,022. And what we looked at, essentially the diminishing return of that margin of error. So right now, with that survey, it's a plus or a minus of 3% at a 99% confidence interval, meaning that 99% of the time, you will find that the answers in that survey are within 3% one way or the other of the answers that they give, which is about an industry standard. To get to a 2% or a 1%, you have to go up by thousands of responses. So you sort of have a diminishing return coming in where it doesn't really make sense to go much beyond that because you're not getting any more reliable information for a lot more people coming into your survey. So that's sort of where we get that number from. And we got to that 3,000 number because you can go lower and still get that number. But we wanted a high confidence in our subsets, especially undergraduate and graduate, because as you get lower in your sample sizes, you can have more margin of error. And that came out to a plus or minus 4, which again is around the industry standard. I believe around 5 or so is the industry standard. So we want to make sure we're in that as well. And that's how we came to that number on OCS.
That's something that a lot of people struggle to understand when it comes to statistics and when it comes to survey methodology is like, how do we try to represent the entire population accurately? And as you said, like, to get to higher confidence intervals, you have to increase the size of the survey, the resource requirements of the survey exponentially, and that just like blows up. But as you said, like industry standard and in the field of research methodology, there are established standards for how to arrive at a confidence of a population. And what I would like you to dig into a little bit more is how you calculate that, like per subgroup, and what are some of the areas of subgroups that you focus on, and like how do you think about subgroups in terms of the overall sample population?
Sure. So it's basically a calculation of a total population versus the sample size you have. So in our smaller surveys, we tend to survey 100 to 150 respondents, but we're looking at a total population of a couple thousand. So again, that's a large percentage of that population. When you get these large populations that are in the millions, you have millions of people who are taking online college, and our survey is those who are enrolled fully online, have been or will in the next year. When you get those populations in the millions, you get to a point essentially where that margin of error just stops going down, because that population size is so large that you're getting that representation regardless of where you are at after a certain point. So that's that. A lot of people look at political polling that way, and they say, you look at a state like Pennsylvania, and there are millions of voters in Pennsylvania, let's say, and they go, well, they only surveyed a couple thousand, or a couple, 1,000. That's not representative. Well, it is in terms of survey methodology and research methodology, because you are getting a representative sample if you're doing it in a manner that is sort of scientific and repeatable. So that's where you sort of get those numbers from. You look at those cross tabs as well. You look at those smaller subsets. And in political polling, when you're looking at so many different groups, you are getting very small, cell sizes, N sizes, population sizes, or sample sizes rather, on those subsets. You might look at, racial background and get like a few hundred in there. And that's when you start seeing those margins of errors go up because of the smaller size versus the larger population. In our survey, I mentioned earlier, we look at different subsets as well, undergraduate and graduate, certificate takers. You look at different demographics in terms of age or gender identity and whatnot, and you can sort of build different subsets and sub-reports and findings based on those as well. One, for example, that you mentioned in your last podcast, if you don't mind me jumping a little bit into what you had said earlier, was about employment numbers. And I believe you said that the employment levels had stayed the same regardless in our surveys over the years, regardless of unemployment going up and down. And we looked into that a bit, and based on your thoughts on that were very interesting. So let's go back and look at that. And we found that there was a stratification in the age demographics between this younger 20, 22, 24 and younger population versus an older population that was sort of driving that employment. What we found was that the younger populations were employed part-time and counted that employment rate versus those older populations, let's say older than 25 or, older than 30, were employed full-time. And that younger population was able to say, I'm going to work part-time and take my studies full-time because I can do that now, especially with online. And while the older population was saying, I need to do that next step in my career, there was a sort of a longer trail of those who were employed longer, though. And they're saying, we need to take our next step in our career, and we need that credential, be it degree or certificate, to move ahead. So those people were employed full-time and using that education to get ahead of their career, whereas the younger were using that online education to begin their career or sort of get that leg up in that next step.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times best-selling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student-centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up what we were kind of talking about in that last episode, because that was what we sort of focused on. We honed in on the job numbers and how they stayed relatively consistent, and we were really impressed by that. And so basically what you're saying is that it was a sort of secondary effect from the changes in the ages of the survey respondents over the years, right? So we'd look back to like 5 or so years, and we'd seen, the same employment number, but basically that was the case because the ages had shifted. And so while the COVID-19 pandemic and while other employment factors had been affecting the economy, the age differences and the ways that more of certain age populations had been sampled in subsequent years had been what had kept the job employment rate consistent.
Exactly.
And Timothy just touched on it as well, but a big question I had for you, because the pandemic was a big part of that question for me, and with it impacting our lives in so many huge ways, how are we taking into account the pandemic and people being stuck at home and changing our lifestyles? How do we account for that in research and try to make sure that we are including it as a factor, but also understanding that it's somewhat of an anomaly?
In terms of research, it's sort of, we do our surveying online. But when you get that, you're doing that telephone surveying as well, there becomes an issue that we've seen for years, which we saw also when I was back when we were doing telephone surveying as well. You have the cell phone only households who you really can't reach that easily. Today, you get, those myriad of spam numbers constantly. And so if you don't have a number that you don't know, you don't pick it up. So it's becoming a little more increasingly difficult to do surveying by phone, regardless of people being home or not. I do think that might actually help a bit in terms of being able to reach people, at least on landlines, if they still have them, which also might be skewing polling results a little bit as well, because you are now getting people who have landlines. I have a landline. I only use it to find my cell phone when I can't find it. So
that's a great use for it, though.
Only thing I use it for is, okay, where's my phone? Can't find it. Let me call my number from my landline. I hear it buzzing somewhere. Great, it's in the house. So, you do have those issues there. And I know that, there's always that, I look at it like a baseball player making adjustments. Like you come into the majors, you are batting 300, the pitchers figure you out. Now you got to figure out the pitchers. So with all types of polling, it's like figuring out how to best reach people. And once they figure out, if there's a way around it, sort of, what's going on in the world of technology and the social thing is going on, how to best react to that. With our online polling and using the panels, I don't think we've really seen that in terms of any struggles there because, as you mentioned earlier, these are people sort of being invited to take these surveys and opted into it. So, while it might lead to a little bit of bias that we sort of remove through these different areas that we talked about earlier, we really don't see that in our surveying as well. Of course, the issue we have is, emails might go to spam or whatnot, but, we really don't see that because we have language and we work with our partners as well when we send out our surveys to make sure that, they have the right language and that aren't being, picked up by spam filters or whatnot and they get to people's inboxes.
That's a fascinating look at how communication methods for conducting surveys have shifted over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm definitely one that does not have a landline anymore and does not answer anonymous phone numbers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really interesting. Jamie, you had one more question, right?
Yeah, I was curious what may have been, because you do a lot of research. Obviously, that's your position, and I'm sure sometimes you were surprised by things. We specifically focused on the enrollment survey before. Was there anything that was really interesting that jumped out to you from that student employee report?
Sure. So on that online college students report, number one, we say this every year, but every year we're more and more surprised by it, is the growth of, and when I say that, we're not really surprised anymore, is the growth of certificates. When we first started doing this survey years and years ago, certificates, micro-credentials were a bit of an afterthought, a little bit like, who needs them? And now they've grown to upwards of 20 to 30% of the market. I believe it was in the 20s at the undergraduate level. I think it was 32% at the graduate level of people taking certificate programs. They see them as sort of these fast ways to earn a credential to get to that next step, lower cost, has that wider acceptance at this point, and therefore has the ability to be taken seriously by employers and by peers and able to move forward without having to take the time and expense of a degree. Now, granted, again, it's more of a degree market. 70% of the graduate market's degree, 80% of the undergraduate market's degree, but certificates are growing. And we saw that sort of confirmed in that spring National Student Clearinghouse data that came out recently that showed, again, that there was a decline in degrees, but a growth in certificates there as well. The other thing that I found, we find a little surprising, is just how quickly students are making their decisions. We're talking weeks to maybe a couple months in that consideration sets. They're building the consideration sets. They are about 1 to 2 schools in a consideration at this point. They know what they're looking for. They are receiving information even before their search begins. We do micro targeting and you look at Google and whatnot, all these, you get cookied and everything. So they know what you're sort of looking at, and therefore they're able to use that information to send over, when you're looking at targeted ads, schools and all that education type of stuff. So from there, you are, they're getting this information, bombarded with them. So by the time they make a decision, they're looking at 1, 2 schools. Mainly in our survey, we saw possibly 3. But generally more closer to 1 to 2, whereas in years past it's been 3 to 4. To sum up that point on school selection, there are smaller consideration sets, about 1 to 2 schools in a consideration set. Consideration sets are being formed based on advertising and other touch points that students are getting even before they begin their enrollment consideration process, and they are making decisions rather quickly. Again, weeks to maybe a little over a month or so is where we're seeing that sweet spot of when they want to get in. And on top of that, they want to enroll quickly. They want to see, they want to be in seats very soon after they get that acceptance and enrollment decision. The last thing that we sort of did this year that was new was to look at where students want to enroll. So in the past, we've always seen that students want to enroll at colleges and universities or educational institutions nearby. It was a well-duh thing by the end. We were like, obviously it's for years and years and years, it hasn't changed. But we said, is that the entire story? It's just having your own, just owning your backyard, is that it? And the answer was no. Over 60% of respondents to our survey said they would enroll at an institution further away if it had the right program for them. So that could mean the right price, the right subject field, the right modality or frequencies, but the right program for them. And in terms of that sort of says to us, yes, own your backyard as a school. That is your biggest market, but note that students can be sort of attracted away if you don't follow their demands and say, this is what I need as a student. Especially with online, there's no need that if I live in, Connecticut, I don't have to go to UConn. I can go to University of Kansas if they have the right program for me and they offer it online. As long as I have that right program that's the right fit for me, I will be able to enroll there. So, A, owning your backyard, and B, ensuring that you have programs that are set for student success. And, one thing I want to add to that is that students are making very quick decisions. There is this sort of middle area where between the consideration starts or pre-consideration all the way to enrollment, and students are making quick decisions, mixing schools, adding schools more in this sort of messy middle area. We sort of looked at it as a bit of a, not so much as a funnel anymore, but as a bit of a, like one of those little crazy straws, the silly straws.
Yeah. So
schools have to also consider that as well. Online education has become more accepted since COVID-19. Everyone's had a, some sort of, if not direct, but tangential connection to it, being that everyone had it, for lack of a better term, foisted upon them in 2020. So the fact that more schools are active in the market, there's more consideration being taken. So it's not that straight funnel. It's not just owning your backyard. It's not, you have to make sure that you are meeting demands. You have to make sure that you are making rapid communication with students, or they'll look elsewhere. And you have to make sure that you remain top of mind to sort of get through that middle spongy area almost, where things can go a little different directions for students along the way.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of good stuff in there that our listeners are going to latch onto. Thank you for those points. The one I want to circle back on and maybe cue you up for here is the certificate market.
Yes.
And how that kind of connects into pathways, because Education Dynamics comes out with another primary research report, usually later on in the year, maybe closer to summer. I can't remember exactly when, but you'll probably know, that talks about workplace fit and degree fit, and is sort of advisable to colleges as they plan their programming. Can you talk a little bit about that report?
Sure. So I believe you're talking about that e-learning index we put out. And in that index, what we do is you look at the NCES data to sort of see what fields are in demand. We did that both nationally and regionally to sort of say, okay, which subject fields are students looking most towards. We looked at growth. We looked at the specific mass of those degrees. And then we also look at trends in outcomes in employment areas that are growing a bit, and sort of say, like, is technology growing, health growing? So you can sort of say, okay, this is what's in demand for students, as well as what is in demand for employment, and sort of matching those up as well. So we look to have that out in the summer, and we are actually starting to work on that now a little bit.
Exciting. Yeah, that'll be something to look for. We'll definitely want to cover that when it comes out.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all this, Steven, and coming on with us. Where can our listeners find the reports that Education Dynamics is putting out?
Sure. On our website, educationdynamics.com. If you go to our website, you will see an area called Insights. In there is information about our 2025 conference, Insight EDU, as well as our blog, ebooks, webinars, and white papers. In there, in the white papers, you will see these reports as well as past reports as well.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you again, Steven, for hanging out with us today and talking to us about what you do and some of your takeaways from the latest online student survey. That's really interesting. That'll wrap us up for this episode. So for Jamie Boggs, I'm Timothy Davis. Thank you guys for joining us.
The EduData podcast is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month. We've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional.
Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Artis Cadu, Dustin Ramsdale, Jeremy Tiers, and so many of your other favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.